It's great watching testimonies because when you see that, something might be stirring in you like, God did that for them. He could do the same thing for me. Um, he, God is really good. He is our source of hope. And really, it's His desire for each of us to live with the expectation of hope because He is at work in our lives. 2 weeks ago, we started a new series called The Way of Hope. And we defined hope like this. We said hope is the confident expectation of good because God said so, and it's choosing to see life through that lens. But we live with a tension in life because what happens when your situation doesn't really look very good, or when what you see and what God has promised really doesn't seem to match? And if we look at the Easter story, if we're really honest, we kind of have to wrestle with that question. It's really easy to celebrate the resurrection today because we know what happened, but I think at the time it did not feel like a victory. It probably felt like a loss. There was probably a lot of confusion, and it probably, honestly, just felt like hope had failed. So today we're going to continue our Way of Hope series, and the title of this message is Hope in the Waiting. If you have your Bibles, if you want to open up to Matthew chapter 26, and we're going to read a little bit in there. And this is the night before the cross. Jesus, He knows what's ahead of Him, and He knows the suffering that He's about to face. And we see something in this moment that's really important, and that is the difference between surrender and resignation. Because on the surface, these things could look the same. Both involve letting go of something when things don't go your way. But underneath, really, they're very different. And the difference between them is often the difference between losing hope or holding on to hope. In Matthew 26:38, Jesus, He's there in the garden, and He's struggling. He said, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." That's heavy. And then He prays, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me, yet I want your will to be done and not mine." So Jesus was experiencing overwhelming grief. He knew the suffering that was ahead of Him, but ultimately He said, "I want your will to be done, not mine." Now, we live in a world that's full of suffering, and really it's here because of sin. And whether you encounter suffering or not is not a question. The question is, will you try to escape it, or will you walk through it with God? Will you seek Him and what He is doing in that situation? See, Jesus, He asked if there was any way to avoid what was coming, but He surrendered Himself to His Father's will, and I think this is a key. Because surrender and resignation are not the same things. Resignation says, this is going to happen, I'm stuck with it, and I'm a victim to this thing. Surrender says, I'm willing to let this happen, I am not a victim. Resignation, on the one hand, is passive, it's negative, it's giving up, really rooted in hopelessness and despair and powerlessness. But surrender, on the other hand, is active. It's a positive letting go based on trust, acceptance, and faith. What resignation does is it can numb our hearts and closes us off to the possibilities, where surrender actually opens us up and allows us to experience peace and new opportunities. Now, if I'm focused on my own will, I might be looking at, what do I stand to lose in this thing? Now, I may give it up, I may resign myself, I may give up my will, but really I'm choosing to live as a victim to my circumstances. And I believe the difference between resignation and surrender actually enables us to have hope and strength during difficulty. When we choose to surrender to God in a circumstance, I'm doing so knowing that he is good and knowing that I can trust him and knowing that he has good intentions for me. When I surrender to him, I'm actually choosing to partner with him and walk through that difficulty together with him. Now, in the garden, we see Jesus, he prayed that prayer 3 times. If it's possible, let there be another way, but, not what I want, what you want. 3 times he prayed that. And I think it's because, or what I take away from this is, surrender isn't something we do just once. It's a repeated thing. Now, if we take a look at the events leading up to the resurrection, it really doesn't seem right. It's not the kind of story we typically want. We don't want a hero who's going to suffer and die unjustly. Like, we want a hero who's going to beat down all his adversaries. We want a hero who is victorious. And by human standards, when you look at the death of Jesus, it did not look victorious. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on the donkey, the people were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." They were all excited. They were expecting this great leader who would defeat all their enemies. Jesus' disciples, they had the same hope. Now, the night when Jesus was arrested in the garden, what happened to the disciples? They all ran away. They couldn't continue because they didn't have any more hope. Now, the disciples, they had seen Jesus perform miracles. They believed he was the Messiah, but they weren't quite fully submitted to God's will. I think they were clinging to this hope of a restored nation. When Jesus told them he would die, Peter actually rebuked him. He said, that can't happen. So the disciples, they had hope until Jesus was arrested. I think they were focused on their circumstances. Now, Jesus, if we look at him, he had hope despite his circumstances. When his disciples abandoned him, he kept moving forward to the cross. His hope was not defined by his circumstances. His hope was in who God is and who he knew God would be for him. After the trial, after Jesus was flogged, he was nailed to a cross. And at that point, by human reasoning, it looked like everything is lost. I pick up here in Matthew 27, verse 45. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until about 3 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" It really looked like he was abandoned. Jesus was alone. Jesus, he shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and the tombs opened up. Jesus was dead. It looked like God's presence was now gone from the temple. The earth shook, tombs opened. It really looked like darkness had won. Now, because it was the evening before the Sabbath, the priests wanted the dead bodies removed from the cross, buried. So one of Jesus' followers named Joseph came and took his body and wrapped it in a long sheet of linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and he left. What else was there to do? Now, Jesus, he had surrendered his will to do the will of the Father. Jesus didn't try to escape suffering. His hope was in God's will being accomplished. And by all appearances at this point, it looked like his hope was in vain. He died on the cross, his body was in a tomb, and the tomb was sealed. Trade? Thanks. One moment. So Jesus, he was placed in a tomb. The tomb was sealed. But it wasn't over. Though nobody understood, God's will was happening. Things were still in process. Now, God's will is ultimately going to be done. Now, this doesn't mean that everything that happens along the way is God's will. But what I mean is that eventually God's plans will be the ones that succeed. You know, we humans, we have a free will. We can decide what we're going to do. The question is, will I choose to surrender to God, or will I put my hope in something other than Him? Romans 8:28 says, God causes everything to work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purposes for them. We like to quote this. Who is this promise for? Well, it's not for everybody. It's for those who love God, those who are living to obey Him, those who are living according to His will and His purposes. If I'm living for something else, it's going to work out differently, I suppose. Basically, what this is saying is, you know, if there's a situation in your life that isn't good yet, then He's not done. He's still working on it. You know, He's got good things in store for you. Your situation is still in progress. It's not the end of the story. So Jesus, He chose to surrender to His Father's will, and even though it looked like everything was lost, Jesus is dead, God was not finished. So we're going to pick up reading in Luke chapter 24. Sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit. So early on Sunday morning, several of the women, they went to the tomb, taking spices they had prepared, and they found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. So they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. And as they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified, and they bowed with their faces to the ground. And the men asked a good question: why are you looking among the dead for somebody who's alive? It's easy to read that, but think about how shocked were they. You know, they came hoping to find somebody help them move the stone. Now the stone's already gone, and there's angels there. So the women, they go and tell the disciples, and unfortunately the disciples are like, yeah, we don't believe you. But two of them thought, we're going to go run and check it out. We don't believe you, but we're going to go see for ourselves. So Peter, this is in John 20, Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They're both running, but the other disciple outran Peter. He reached the tomb first. He looks inside. He sees the linen wrappings that are there, but he didn't go in. So then Peter shows up, and he always just charges ahead. He runs in. He sees the linen wrappings laying there, but the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up, lying apart from the other wrappings. That's really interesting. Why was that? The thing that was around his head, why was that folded up? It doesn't explicitly tell us. I'll suggest something. So when Jesus rose from the dead, we see He removed everything that bound Him. He wasn't just escaping death. He completely conquered death and the grave. So He's not running away from the tomb. I think He got up, took everything off. He's not in a hurry. He took that thing, whatever it was, and He folded it up and laid it there. And He walked out completely free and unhindered. He wasn't escaping. He walked out. He had already defeated death and the grave. Now, 2 weeks ago, we had looked at the story of Lazarus. And what we see in the raising of Lazarus is different than what we see in Jesus' own resurrection. Now, after the stone was rolled away from Lazarus' tomb, Jesus shouts, "Lazarus, come on out." And so the dead man comes out. Of course, he's not dead now, but his hands and his feet are bound in grave clothes, his head's wrapped with the cloth. And what does Jesus do? He says, unwrap him, let him go. So we see some noticeable differences here between the two resurrections. Before Lazarus came out, somebody else had to roll that stone away. Jesus, He calls Lazarus, and when he comes out, he's all wrapped up. His face is covered, and other people need to come and release him from that. Now, in Jesus' resurrection, no one calls him out. He just comes out. He doesn't need anyone to tell him to come back. He had the authority to take up his life again. No one had to move the stone for Jesus. Now, in Matthew 28, we have the account of the women going to the tomb, and when they get to the tomb, the stone is rolled aside, an angel rolls it aside, and he sits on it. So I expect that the angel moved the stone for the women to be able to see. I think Jesus was already gone. He had left on his own. He didn't need that stone to be moved. And we see in the resurrection of Jesus, he removed the grave clothes from himself. He didn't need anyone to help him. So Lazarus came to life. He's all wrapped up. He was still bound by what held him, and others had to set him free. Jesus, he was completely free. Now, I think, like Lazarus, we can experience new life, but we can still be wrapped up in grave clothes. That can be old mindsets. It can be shame from the past. It can be pain. It can be who I think I am, an old identity. It could be old addictions. We can take a step forward into new life and not fully let go of that old stuff. We can actually still be wrapped up in it. So we look at Jesus. He went into the tomb carrying the sins of the world, everybody. And when he rose, he left it all there. He came out in new life. And this is what Jesus offers us. He offers us that same exchange. We give him our sin, our past, our failures, our guilt, shame, all that. He offers us new life. So here, freedom is an important part of this church. We believe it's an important mission here. We want everyone to experience freedom, which is why we have the freedom class. It's why we have Connect Up prayer ministry sessions. It's why we have water baptism. Because freedom is really, it's a process. It's a journey of letting go of things from the past and embracing a new identity in Jesus and becoming like him. It's a journey. It's salvation when a person accepts Jesus as Lord and Savior, when they accept that forgiveness. What happens? Our spirit is made new. The Holy Spirit is put inside of us. We are reborn. We have new life. And then we continue to partner with Jesus to bring that freedom and that new life out into our soul, into our body. And really, I believe this is the importance of water baptism. Water baptism, it's a declaration to the world, to people, also the spirit realm, that, hey, I am a new person in Jesus. When a person goes under the water in baptism, what are we saying? We're identifying with the death of Jesus. And when we come up, everything stays behind, and we're identifying with Jesus, the new life of Jesus. The old stuff, the sin that stays in the water baptism, it's meant to follow a decision to accept Jesus in short order because we want to get rid of all that stuff. Water baptism is a really good picture of Easter. Again, I died with Jesus and I'm risen with him. Everything that bound me stays behind. I enter new life free and unbound. And if you haven't been water baptized, let's try that again. If you haven't been water baptized, if you're not seeking after freedom, you could be like Lazarus, walking around wrapped up in grave clothes, when you could be free because of what Jesus paid for you on the cross. Now, if you have given your life to Jesus and you've not been baptized, we do have a baptism service coming up May 3rd. Why? Because there's no reason to go through life like a zombie, wrapped up, walking around in grave clothes. He wants us to be free. He paid for that. Now, when Jesus rose, he got a new body. And it's like the body we will receive after this life when Jesus returns. And personally, I am looking forward to an upgraded body. Jesus' new body has features that mine does not have, and yours does not have. We see with his resurrected body, Jesus, he could appear and reappear at will, even in locked rooms. So you never get locked out of your car, your office, your house. He can move between the physical world and the spirit realm. He could alter his appearance as he did at the tomb when Mary thought he was a gardener, as he did on the road to Emmaus with the two disciples who didn't recognize him. So if you look at it, Jesus' resurrected body was a big upgrade from the human body that he was born with. Yet I think we see something puzzling in this. When he rose from the dead with a new body, his new body had scars. Isn't that interesting? Now, after his resurrection, he appeared to his disciples in the locked room, and so apparently they didn't recognize him either. They thought he was a ghost. This is in Luke 24. "Why are you frightened?" Jesus asked. "Why are your hearts filled with doubt? Look at my hands, look at my feet. You can see that it's really me. Touch me, make sure that I am not a ghost, because ghosts don't have bodies as you see that I do." And as he spoke, he showed them his hands and his feet. Why? Well, I think he was showing them where the nails had been. So Thomas, he wasn't there that day. He was on vacation. They told him about it. He said, "Yep, I don't believe it until I actually touch those wounds." So 8 days later, the disciples are together again. Thomas is there this time. Jesus shows up. The doors are locked. He's just standing there. He says, "Peace." Of course, they're all freaked out, but he says to Thomas, "Hey, put your finger here. Look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." So he's alive. Jesus is alive. He's got a brand new body that could do cool stuff like change appearance and show up in locked rooms. And he kept his scars. Isn't that just something? That's interesting. Jesus was not defined by his wounds. His scars showed what he had overcome. See, he was nailed to a cross, and he did die, but he defeated death, and he's got the scars to prove it. So if you think about it, at this moment, there is a resurrected man in heaven, the Son of God, and he's got scars on him. So what does that mean for us? Is it means God does not erase your story. What he does is he redeems it. When we surrender and partner with God in what he is doing, he will bring healing to what has wounded us. Now, you're not defined by your wounds, so don't let your wounds become your identity. You don't want to get stuck in where you're wounded. That is not who you are. You want to receive healing from Jesus, but you don't want to stop there. What you want to do is allow Jesus to actually redeem those wounds, the things that the enemy did to you to try to destroy you. He wants to redeem those and use those things for good. What does that mean? So basically, Jesus wants to take what's been done to you where you've been wounded, basically weaponize you as someone who can bring payback to the enemy. Now think about it. We don't refer to Jesus as the one who died. He is the one who rose from the dead. So we don't identify him by the wounds, but what he overcame. He's the one who rose from the dead. Because Jesus died and because he rose again, he is able to give new life to everybody who comes to him. Do you see that? Satan tried to destroy him. He overcame that, and now he can give us new life. All right? So our Connect Up team was recently learning how can we bring healing to people who have dealt with the trauma of having had abortions or miscarriages. And I want to share a testimony that we heard. This is really good. So this woman, she shared a testimony of something that happened to her. 50 years ago, when she was a teenager, she got pregnant. So she's about 50 plus teenager, almost 70. And as a teenager, her parents forced her to have an abortion. She had no choice. She couldn't have the baby. It was really shameful, had to have an abortion. Now, years later, she meets Jesus, and she learns Jesus' perspective on life. He values life. But Jesus, he doesn't condemn. What he does is he restores and he redeems. So Jesus, he brought healing to this woman's trauma, healing to the physical problems that resulted from the abortion. And she began going and helping other young women who were in similar situations as she had been. And a lot of lives were saved through that. Now, recently, before abortion was overturned, this woman actually had the opportunity to share her testimony before the Supreme Court. She's come like a really long way. It's like, that's incredible. So what the enemy meant to destroy her as a teenager, Jesus healed and he redeemed it. And now he is working through her to help others who struggle in the same way. So if you look at that, that's just, she's had an incredible impact on the lives of so many people. When we think about life, we think, I would love to live a life without battles, without fear, without disappointment, without failure, without ever being wounded. And when these things happen, we would love to forget those things. But Jesus, what he says is, I'll take your struggles, and I am actually going to redeem those things. I will make you stronger through them and use you to bring healing to other people. Basically, he's saying, I'm going to use you to fight the kingdom of darkness in those areas and use you to get vengeance on the enemy, use you to bring heaven to earth. So God, he is in the business of making all things new. So interesting again. Jesus gets a new body, and it had the scars to show what he had overcome. So when we surrender to Jesus, he brings healing, but we're left with the scars of what we have overcome. And if we're willing to really surrender to him, he will redeem those things and use us, again, to bring payback to the enemy. He tried to destroy you, but now you're going to take it back to him. He's going to use you to bring freedom to others in those areas. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's really good. So as we celebrate Easter, we're not just celebrating, okay, this happened 2,000 years ago. We're celebrating what is still possible today. You see, Jesus, he came out of the grave to offer us something. New life, freedom, a restored identity, hope. Jesus, what we've seen today, Jesus, he didn't try to avoid the cross. He asked, is there any other way? But he surrendered to the Father. And because he surrendered, resurrection followed. And so that same kind of thing is available to us. When we surrender our lives to God, we're not resigning, we're not giving up, we're not becoming victims, but we're choosing to trust him. And that's where hope really comes alive. That's where healing begins, and that's where freedom really begins. And that's where God, he's able to redeem the things that once felt like they're just too far gone. The resurrection of Jesus, it reminds us, if it's not good yet, then God, he's not done yet. The story isn't over.